For their dinner, yeah.
Uh, Hello, tech team. Are we good? Okay, awesome. Good evening, everyone, on a beautiful Monday evening. It's March, Illinois. What are we doing? You know, it's like 30 degrees. This is not okay. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting of the Bloomington City Council to order. If everyone could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Okay, Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Walsh.
Here.
Councilmember Bolin. Here. Councilmember Motney is absent. Councilmember Emig.
Present.
Councilmember Becker.
Here.
Councilmember Urban.
Here.
Councilmember Ward.
Here.
Councilmember Crable.
Here.
Councilmember Crumpler.
Here.
Mayor Millamboy.
Here, we are on a roll today. I crack myself up. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment?
We have two individuals registered to speak in person.
Okay, awesome. I'm gonna go ahead and read my statement. Public comment is an opportunity for speakers to provide their views and feedback to the city council. It is also an opportunity for the city council to listen to and hear diverse points of view. To maximize the impact of public comment and show respect for the expression of all views, speakers should maintain civility and focus on city issues. Speakers must identify themselves for the record, but are not required to give their address. Each speaker is given the floor for 3 minutes, and the council does not respond or engage in debate. Any speaker that engages in threatening and disorderly behavior will be deemed out of order and their time will be seized. And if you go beyond the 3 minutes, I will stop you just because not because I'm a rude individual, but just to make it fair to everyone. So can we proceed with the first person?
First up, we have Scott Steimling. Then we have Mark Larson.
Okay,
Then while Mr. Steimling is coming to the podium, we didn't have any emailed public comment.
thank you.
Scott Steimling, Ward 5. In my opinion, is the roads are absolutely terrible in this town, and the sidewalks are just as bad. When I was several years ago, there was a grandmother with her granddaughter in a wheelchair. She tried the sidewalks, and they were terrible, and they went and tried the streets, they were worse yet. I mean, that speaks real well for the city of Bloomington. And I would be embarrassed. You know, I guess the thing, labor was a heck of a lot lower. Materials were a heck of a lot lower when these roads could have been replaced then, but the city seems to wait until they can do it at a higher cost, and it comes out of the tax money. So the taxes go up and the infrastructure goes down. And it's amazing that there are other municipalities that the roads and the streets are, the roads and the sidewalks, excuse me, are a heck of a lot better. And the taxes are lower. I don't understand why the city waits to do things until they pay the maximum and deliver the minimum, as far as I'm concerned. The storm drains are dangerously low. I had no problem cleaning them out myself and save the city a trip out, but they got so bad, I just called the city and let them come out and do it. I thought, fine, keep the roads up and raise the drains and I'll clean them out. The city can come out and clean them out the other way. And there goes your taxes again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Next.
Next, we have Mark Larson.
Mark, did you go to the restroom? Was he?
That's
No?
all we had.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Then we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next item on the agenda. The first one is 6A is recognition of boards and commissions and appointments and reappointments as requested by the administration department. I believe, do we have a PowerPoint slide to recognize those individuals? Usually Leslie reads the names.
Sorry, I thought you read the name.
No.
Justin Gandhi, Bloomington, or Building Board of Appeals. Frederick Marling, Citizens Beautification Committee. Tracy Coe, Cultural Commission. I'm gonna mispronounce this and I apologize. Faisal Rashid, Cultural Commission. Bennett Morris, Japanese Sister Cities Committee. Catherine Scheck, Japanese Sister Cities Committee. Reappointments, we have Ashley Farmer for the Public Safety Community Relations Board. Rachel McFarland, also for Public Safety Community Relations Board. That's it.
Okay, thank you. And if all of you, I should have asked you to stand earlier. If you could stand, please, so people can see you and recognize you. I think okay, awesome. Thank you very much. We very much look forward to, I know in Rachel's case, the work that you've already done with the PSCRB, but Faisal, we also look forward to the work that you're going to do on the Cultural Commission. I know we had a great conversation about what you think you can bring and really very much look forward to that. So thank you both very much for your dedication, commitment. I know it takes a lot of time out of your busy schedule. We definitely appreciate that. Thank you. We are going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a proclamation for Gay Beck's retirement as requested by the administration department. So if we could have Gay come and step forward to the microphone. And I'm going to go ahead and read the proclamation. And then after that, I will give you a couple of minutes to say a few words if you'd like.
Thank you.
And also for friends and family to take pictures while I hand out the proclamation to Gay as well. Thank you. So this is a mayoral proclamation honoring Gay Beck's retirement and 40 years of contribution as a small business owner. Whereas the city of Bloomington values local small businesses and celebrates their many contributions to our community. And whereas Gay Beck and Beck's family florists have been a vital part of the downtown business landscape for 40 years since opening in 1984 at As Balloons and More. And whereas Gay's desire to make people smile and plenty of hard work led to the expansion of her business into Beck's Family Florist, a full-service floral shop located in the historic 1902 Phoenix Mid-City Hotel building And whereas in 2016, she converted the upper levels of the former hotel into 6 loft apartments known as Phoenix Lofts and received a Heritage Award for notable achievements in restoration for the work. And whereas often contributing quietly behind the scenes, Gay's community service spans decades, including work with Rotary, their Heritage Festival team for many years and more. And now, therefore, I, Mayor Mboka Malambwe, do hereby congratulate Gay Beck on her retirement and extend our sincere gratitude for her work in our community. Thank you very much, Gay.
Thank you.
So now, would you like to say a few words?
This is very humbling. Thank you so much. It's hard being retired. When you work with people for 40 years, it's tough to give that up. I'm trying. Lots of travel in the future, I'm hoping. But I do truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you once again, you're very welcome. And let me tell you one thing about retirement. What I've heard is that it's not actually true. You don't actually get to retire. I'm sure you'll find plenty of things to do, and I know you've built a lot of friendships around town, and I think a lot of people will be calling on you to be doing other things.
And
So-
I'll be amiss in not saying, if it weren't for family and friends, I wouldn't be here. So thank you.
Thank you, thank you. For one, my family would need probably somebody to decorate our house a little bit with flowers. So we might call on you.
Well, like the window says downtown, we didn't close, we moved. I was very fortunate to have someone buy the shop. And there's now a really nice space down there with 2,000 square feet that needs to be rented if anybody's interested. Yeah, it's Forget Me Not Flowers bought me, and all the talent from my shop went to that shop. Isn't that right, Tim?
Okay. Awesome, awesome. Would you like to come by, and if someone would like to take a picture while
Want me to come up there?
yes, if you could, please. And if anybody else that wants to take a picture of me handing this out to her would be great. The mayor doesn't bite, nor do the council members. You can come a little closer if you like. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, which only has 2 items. So if anybody pulls anything, I'm gonna have a cow.
I'll move approval.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. It did, yes, it did, and nobody took me up on it. And we do have a link,
We do.
right, tech team? Tech team is looking comfy back there. Oh, we're missing Councilmember Ward. Okay, awesome. Okay, it passes unanimously. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a regular agenda, item 8A, a presentation of fiscal year 2024 proposed budget as requested by the Finance Department. And coming to the podium is our superstar finance director, Dr. Rathbun. I'm going to call you doctor now. Doctor in finance. And I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Gleason for some comments. You just stop me when I'm goofing around.
I was just waiting for my turn.
Okay, next time
All
elbow
good.
me.
Just a couple of quick comments to the mayor, the council, more so the community. We're down the home stretch of the FY24. Again, our budget cycle is May 1st, April 30th of every year. And what remains on the schedule to approve, to bring for approval the FY24 budget in front of council is nothing next week at the committee of the whole. A public hearing that's been posted in the Panagraph that will be on the 27th. And then the budget approval for FY24 will be the first council meeting in April, April 10th. Is what the tentative schedule is for approval and adoption, and then implementation on May 1st, hopefully. I guess a couple of things real quick that I'd like to say that just mirror the mayor's comments, council member comments that we've heard in the past, and I've said this as well. We're stewards of the taxpayer dollars. This is the largest budget that this community has ever had. And it's not because we can, it's because this is the vision of the elected officials. This is input from the community, and we're very fortunate as a community. And I like to think that the community is in very good hands with the elected officials and the staff that are in place to carry out this vision and the desires of the community. So I'm very excited to turn this over to Scott to walk us through the proposed budget for FY24. Scott.
Thank you, City Manager Gleason, Mayor, Council, Community. Yes, this is the fourth presentation on the budget this year. By city code, we're required to submit a proposed budget by March 15th. So, to that end, we kind of build with our presentations up to this point. Adding on, we like to do kind of a recurring exhibits so that the community and council, everyone becomes familiar with the finances of the city. It's a complex financial structure. You've heard me discuss before, 29 funds, and they're kind of interrelated, but kind of not as well. So tonight we'll be reviewing some of those same slides that we've done previously, but also adding on and then discussing or presenting like where some additional resources are online. The budget books are posted now. They will change dramatically between now and the end of year. We'll be adding the future years. So there'll be larger budget books by the end of May or so, the city manager letter as well. So having said that, first slide, please. My watch here. So no material changes have occurred since the last presentation. It's a strong budget. As city manager mentioned, 290 million, 70 million of that in capital projects / infrastructure. We've discussed previously what is kind of really driving the changes. One material change we do have to this exhibit, and really the only thing that that the current year is being reflected in these presentations is our general fund projection for the end of 24. So this has gone up from the previous presentation. Right now, if you work this math, math backwards, we're showing still $3.4 million use of reserves for 2024. So what we're doing right now is showing that we're projecting fiscal year end 23 for the general fund to be around $46 to $47 million in reserves. Revenues continue to stay elevated. You're going to hear more about this during the monthly report, but some expenditures are getting pushed out into next year. We're not seeing those material enough to add to the budget for next year, but that's impacting our reserves. And as I've mentioned previously, this gives us the opportunity, the flexibility to have those discussions. Maybe we've been delaying on related to fire stations, downtown, public works facilities, and some of the needs of the other funds. We're discussing with council the use of reserves related to some of the enterprise funds that need to borrow for Locust Colton. So saving those other funds interest, this gives us the flexibility to do that. Next slide, please. This is our budget growth exhibit that's created last year, trying to highlight the growth in the budget, that we don't have a large growth in government. So essentially this takes the gross budget every year and adjusts it for capital projects and non-recurring. And this exhibit is really highlighting that we've grown at about a 3% annualized rate since 2016. And one thing a highlight that came up with some discussions with the mayor was that a significant portion of that increase occurred after 2016 when the sales tax and utility tax increases went into effect. A lot of that is captured in the projects, but there are transfers related to those. So that drove our budget up by about $17 million from year to year. They're not just those taxes alone, but that's when the city kind of took a look at the future and started making adjustments that they hadn't done in quite some time. So adjusting for that year, we've grown at about a 1.9 to 2% rate since 2017. Next slide, please. Major tax revenues. These revenues impact the general fund primarily, but not solely. We've highlighted that, for FY23, we're looking at +13. That's probably higher now, $1 million exceeding budget for these tax revenues. But for 24, we're only looking at increasing the year-over-year budget by 4.9 million. So we're basically taking about 38% of the projected overage that we're looking at for 23 and including that in the 24 budget. So we are expecting those taxes to stay elevated, but not at the rate they are in this current fiscal year. So just adding, that additional about $5 million for major tax revenues. Next slide, please. The general fund. So the general fund, that's primarily financed by tax revenues. You can see that it's $99.8 million of the $129 million budget is tax revenues. This gets a lot of conversation, but the primary services in the general fund are really public safety and quality of life, and then some general infrastructure. So you'll see in a moment, public safety makes up about 50% of our budget. Parks and rec, about 11 to 12%. So the general fund, houses those activities, and then what we refer to as our enterprise funds or business funds, water, sewer, storm, solid waste. Those are more like business-like. They have their own dedicated fees and exist on their own. The charges for services, I want to highlight this line, additional time here, almost a $4 million increase. Most of that related to the ambulance, the GMET program, that's ground emergency medical transport, came into effect a couple years ago. This is a Medicaid expense coverage program from the federal government. It's had a very significant impact on the general fund, positive impact. Next slide, please. General fund expenditures, just highlighting a couple of items here. Salary increase, $3.7 million. We've added 4 inspectors in building safety and community enhancement. And then I've indicated previously 2 in HR. There's other miscellaneous ups and downs within the general fund, but 2 in human resources for a recruiter and for a training officer. So basically for recruiting and retention of employees. We've currently have about 38 active positions we're recruiting for, and that can vary considerably as time goes on. So it's a constant impact to the city and the services that we provide. And then the transfers out, I kind of went past this in the revenue section, but the use reserves for the general fund, we are subsidizing some of the other enterprise funds that have difficult time paying for their own capital projects. So we're subsidizing golf. You can see a golf 1.25 million, the Lincoln Garage, and then additional $1 million for streets for 2024. Do an additional $3 million over the recurring revenue dedicated to streets of local motor fuel tax and home rule. $2 million is made up by ARPA, but we're doing another $1 million from the general fund as in the form of a subsidy. Next slide, please. And this is the general fund by function. Next year, we're going to update this to show the percentage of these departments for the total, but I have it on my sheet. I again wanted to highlight, we give the general fund a lot of discussion. It's the largest fund of our 29 funds, but this kind of highlights what it does. But primarily, public safety and quality of life are the two largest departments. We're still kind of incorporating the BCPA under Parks and Rec. We just haven't figured out how to split that out yet because the arena is its own fund, even though we have Anthony Nelson, the Director of Arts and Entertainment now. But from a financial structure standpoint, we're still grouping it there. So that's why you see Parks, Rec, and Cultural Arts. And then you can see the rest of the activity is what I'll call general infrastructure and support of other parts, associations within the community. You have the McLean County Health, and then, Connect Transit as well in this grouping. But public safety is about 50% of the total expenditure budget. When you adjust it for the right side over there, the revenues, Parks has a significant revenue source related to its service fees. It kind of adjusts the total to about 54% of the total. and parks is about 11%. It doesn't change that much or too dramatically for that division, excuse me. Next slide, please. Citywide revenues, no change here. You can see use of fund balance. So highlighting this pretty much every presentation, we balance the budget. The city of Bloomington, we show a balanced budget, revenues matching expenditures, but the use of fund balance is I guess, somewhat artificial. It's not the current year revenues, it's use of savings. So highlighting this is a use of savings, use of reserves, $43.7 million. You can see in the notes section, a significant portion of that is the state motor fuel tax fund. Very large projects have been rolling through there, utilizing some other reserves and capital improvement, asphalt and concrete, water, et cetera. And then also rolling down investment income. I want to highlight, I'd like to take credit for engaging the investment advisors, but really interest rates, they're up in 4 or 5% range now for money market funds. Just you flash back a year and a half ago, we were down to like 0.1% interest. So that is just a very material change. I think we're probably light on this budget line, but you don't want to base your operational efficiencies or structure on investment income. But as I've mentioned before, we'll take it. Next slide, please. Citywide expenditures, the 290 million salaries, a $5.2 million increase, 3.6 million of that we just went through was for the general fund and the positions I mentioned before. I wanted to highlight a note comment here on the capital expenditures where we have a $10.8 million increase, but we referenced the $12.8 million increase in capital projects. It's on the capital project exhibit, so those numbers don't match. But within the capital projects, the way we do that exhibit, we also include design cost, which is part of contractual. So from a financial exhibit standpoint, the expenditure line items don't match up exactly with the way we portray the capital projects. So just making that difference so that people reading this aren't misassociating those numbers. And then the transfers out. I'd like to highlight these transfers because they have they're not a tendency, they gross up our budget because if the general fund is subsidizing other funds, the revenues come into the general fund, that's revenue coming into the general fund. And then we do a transfer out of the general fund, that's an expenditure there, a transfer into the enterprise fund, that's revenue there. And then we do the expenditure in the enterprise fund. So whenever we do a subsidy, it has a double impact on our budget. So just want to highlight, that's one of the offsetting items in our growth from year to year, but we took that line out from the budget growth exhibit because it was too confusing. And our growth is showing pretty level at the 3%, even without that adjustment. Next slide, please. A general fund by, or not the general fund, the citywide by fund. The one line item I wanted to highlight that came up during the previous presentation was the IDA fund. I misrepresented that slightly with the explanation before that a couple of programs were being combined. One was being eliminated in that fund, and that since the dollars were not known, it was lowered. Well, further research and dealing with the department director, we found out that FY23 was just an elevated year because many program dollars were extended into FY23 due to COVID. So the $294,000 is really more in line with typical activity for that fund. Next slide, please. This is an exhibit we added due to a question during the last presentation, and just it highlights our general obligation bond maturity schedules. And you can see when bonds are rolling off, and it's a little confusing because these bonds are spread out over various funds. So we can do a deep dive into bonds at another meeting sometime. But the one thing I want to highlight here is that when we in finance and all the directors, when we do the budget, we're doing presentations on the coming year, but we're doing a 5-year budget. So when the final budget books comes out, it's going to have 24 all the way out through 28. And what we're doing is we're incorporating all these bond roll-offs and the different amounts throughout that 5-year projected budget timeline. And we're balancing out the dollars available. And what we've done is we've incorporated $2 million we, found, if you will, $2 million for capital improvement fund. Those are the general infrastructure fund, related to just city hall improvements, that kind of thing. And $3 million for asphalt and concrete out into those future years. So, looking out, making those commitments, financially, and I'm trying to figure out if we can afford the desires of the community and council, and take into account bond roll-offs, et cetera, in those plans. Next slide, please. This is the same exhibit we've highlighted previously. Asphalt and concrete. There was a question during the previous presentation about, the $3 million in inflation, what the impact of that 3 million is going to have. My understanding is Public Works is going to come back in the committee of the whole in April and do a presentation highlighting, the plans and the impacts of that. But again, a very, I think, ambitious, $70 million in capital projects for the coming year. Hopefully, touching on a lot of the lives here in the community, impacting them positively. Next slide, please. These next two slides are really just to highlight the information that's available online in the budget books. And this is actually not the entire detail sheet for a project. So within Budget Book 2, there's a detailed project sheet for every capital project. And it has a description, there's pictures. Some of them are very interesting pictures of, large valves and things of that nature. There's a table that shows kind of if it's a multi-phase project, what the phases are going to be. So this is just an example for the state motor fuel tax, Hamilton Road, Bund Street to Morrissey Drive. It has a map and the dollar amounts. And then next slide, please. Here we go. And this is the exhibit for the rooftop units. It shows the pictures of all the corrosion, et cetera, and kind of gives some context to the size of those units, because it's hard to put into perspective, why are the rooftop units going to cost $5 million? But we want to give the community, the resources that they need to see what the city's doing with their funds. And I want to highlight that a lot of information is available online. The budget books are also, and I was going to mention this in a moment, but I'll mention it now. They're also available hard copies at the hub and at the library. So people don't have access to the internet, they can go to those locations and flip through the budget and see what's available. Next slide, please. You're doing okay on time. Okay. With these slides, we added a couple of years ago because there's the challenge of adding context perspective to, a $290 million budget. Where are the dollars going? How is it impacting our lives here, in the community? So this is not, all inclusive, but this is some of the information that's available in the front part of the budget book. It's in the back part of the audit, and it kind of puts into context, what is going on with the community's dollars. So you can see, and this is kind of the last full year of data that we have from the department. Some of it's on calendar year, some of it's on fiscal. So it's just the last full year that we're able to get from the departments. So police and fire, a combined 89,000, service calls or runs, if you will. Parks, you can see the attendance for all their different programs. 38, and some of these are referencing like, we have a closed pool now, but what's in the budget? So we have 2 pools listed here in the skate park. This is what has been, it might not be right now, but what has been maintained. 38 parks, all the spray parks, the pools, the lakes, 30 miles of trail, et cetera. Community development, how many building permits? Almost 1,900. Economic development, 1,100 business contacts. Facilities, they maintain a lot of property for the city, 1 million square feet, I'd say at least. Library, 207,000 visits. Arena attendees, 31,000. Next slide, please. And then I won't read through all these, but Public Works, the number of lane miles, the trash hauled, 17.3 tons, 35 million pounds of trash. That's a lot of activity. Sewer, 1,000 miles, water pump, 4 billion gallons annually. To toot our finance horn, we do about 30,000 utility bills per month. Well, it's just not the bill, it's also the application of the payments and all the questions and adjustments that come in related to that. A clerk, FOIAs, 1,900, and that's going up every year. Amanda could probably speak to that. Legal, administrative court cases, human resources. This number is up from last year, applications processed. So a constant effort by the city to keep the ranks of the staff filled. Information services, 3,000 devices, 100 applications. probably more than that. We're adding IT, that's a big initiative, how to make the city operate more efficiently, but also it's the expectation of the community too. What are those touch points like? The community's expectations grow as technology grows. So there's lots of stats we could show you, the council and the community, but I'm just kind of hoping that this provides some context to where the dollars are going, the level of activity, and in a way, the level of expertise that's required to provide these services. Everything from horticulture, in the Parks Department to civil engineers, in public works. Next slide, please. So resources about the budget for the community. The proposed budget books are online, and as I mentioned, there's hard copies in the hub and at the library. The books will add the future years for the adoption. Right now, they don't include those because we want to wait until the budget, the current year, the next year is adopted before we push all that out through, make sure there's no changes. To highlight some of how their books are organized. First book is the general fund, year-over-year revenues and expenditures. And the book number 2 is capital improvement and all the enterprise funds. These are some of what people are really interested in. But both books have department narratives. What does this department do? What does community enhancement do? IDA, what does that stand for? That kind of thing. And then we also have, there's a budget video series. It's kind of like Budget 101, explains the structure, financial structure of the city, and a lot of information just online. And as city manager mentioned, the proposed budget public hearing will be on the 27th. The notice was in the Panagraph today related to that, to give the community a heads up on it. And then the final council budget adoption on April 10th. Next slide, please. So as I started the presentation, I feel it's a very strong budget and ambitious in the extent for capital projects. As I mentioned, in the 5-year, we're building in $3 million for asphalt and concrete, trying to build in $2 million for the capital improvement fund and subsidizing other funds as needed. We have subsidies in for golf and ALG out through the 5 years, building that in. We're hoping this demonstrates sound financial management, adherence to that, philosophy, being good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, and hoping that the community sees that this budget will positively impact their lives and the services that they'll receive and that they deserve to receive. So, having said that, I will pause for questions or comments.
Okay. Council questions, comments? Councilmember Crable.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Scott, and thank you to Chris and all your team for great work on the budget. Like you said, it's a lot more than numbers, right? And you do well to put everything in context, and you do receive an award every year, it seems like, for the last number of years, on basically having a budget that's easy to understand and has all the things necessary in it for the public. So appreciate that. You did say, I was going to commend you for the reduction in the number of pages, but apparently that's going to increase at the end, right?
Yes. Well, sidebar on that. When city manager first joined, he asked about, the voluminous, and we looked at trying to reduce it. And then every time I looked at it, it was like, well, that seems kind of important, and that seems kind of important. But yes, so it's going to grow back up for the adopted.
Okay. How many budget books do we print out?
We downsized that considerably a few years ago. And
Right.
so I think we only print 5.
Okay.
If I recall. It's like I get one and the finance team and
And that includes the ones to the public at the
yes,
library?
for the
Okay.
hub and for the library.
Okay, great. I just want to highlight a number of things I think are good in addition to what Scott highlighted, and then some questions. For instance, the budget includes the top 10 employers, and it compares it to 10 years ago. And, I know Rivian made a big change in that number the last few years, but the top 10 made up 38, almost 39% of all employment in the community versus 30% in 2012. To me, that shows we're a little bit less diverse in our economy than what we have been in the past. Also, it looks like when we talk about, I'm going to skip around here, but combined sewer. I noted that in the last 10 years, it's gone down by about 6 miles, and that probably from 88 to 82. So that's probably due to locust cold to a great extent. I don't think, we kind of take it for granted that the budget's always balanced. That's not always the case for every government entity. We're supposed to have a balance, a fund balance of 10 to 15%. It's 33%. And that allows us to do additional things that we might not otherwise be able to do. And I also noted there was a rating agency review, and the city's outlook was upgraded from stable to positive. And I think that has a lot to do with what you do and the balance that we keep. Also, I know we've done a number of bonds. I'm thinking like the library and the O'Neill Pool. But if you look at our debt ratio, and I think that's connected, right? Compared to other cities, basically ours is FY22 is $490. So that does that not include the O'Neill, and it does not? Okay. What would you estimate that number to be compared to, because it looks like we were like second lowest, and like normal was 1,500, like 3 times as big.
I can bring that back the next time. I know I had that exhibit when we brought that
Okay.
bond forward. It definitely goes up significantly. That exhibit, we utilize audits for that. And so since that's the most recent audit, it
Mhm.
include the.
Okay. Thanks. I think you focused on, what are our priorities? What does a budget show as our priorities? And that's infrastructure and public safety. And I think 45% of our property taxes go to police and fire, whether that's operationally or pensions.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay. And I want to note too that, we don't mention this a lot, but we were required by the state a number of years ago to fund the pensions, public safety pensions, a minimum of 90%, right? And now, but we decided back then to do 100%. So I asked Scott, how much would that be total? So we've actually, maybe 5-6 years, I don't recall, but we've put into our pension an extra 16.2 million total in that time period than what we otherwise had to.
Right. That an approximate number. Right?
Yeah, it's approximate, right. If we look at our tax rate comparison, property taxes are in the middle of comparable communities. Our sales tax rate is one of the lowest. Salaries, like you mentioned, public safety takes up 64% of salaries. The next is 4.6%. The BCPA, takes up 1.5%, right? And also noted that, we have so many volunteers as the BCPA that we save about $191,000 from our budget because of those volunteer hours. And also when we talk about fund budgets, the police and fire budgets went up each by 8%. And if you look at it from a number perspective, they went up the most in 2 million, whatever, approximately, I think each on that, again, to show that we are investing in public safety. And also I just noted, I think something at the end, it seems like we're rebounding from COVID with regard to attendance, both at the library and in our recreational programs. Would that be, it's not where it was, but it's getting there. That's what the numbers seem to show to me. And then the questions, we went back and forth, but there are 2 rental inspectors, but now there's 7 like overall inspectors. And so do we have more than 2 people inspecting rental properties?
Yeah, I saw your, excuse me, too close. Do you have that one?
There we go. We do have 7 inspectors, and Melissa, the Economic Community Development Director, is currently cross-training so that they can also perform general property maintenance. So while it's not completed yet, eventually all 7 will be able to do that.
Okay.
Rental inspection, also increasing frequency of rental.
That's
inspections
great.
As well.
I don't think that's 100% clear in the budget, but it was clear, so I appreciate that clarification. It was mentioned the city's developing a 20-year plan for major capital projects. I think that development's been going on for a while. Do we have a potential end date for having that done?
That's something that the new council is going to see yet this year. You're talking about the water master plan?
No, it's the capital projects plan. Do you know what I'm talking about, Scott? Maybe it includes water too, but
It does, but we probably need to, there's certain references in there that we probably need to pay some attention to and get those updated on the, on a current strategy or current discussion basis.
okay. But do we know when we're looking to have that done?
I'm going to double check on that one and make sure we get
Okay.
an accurate answer.
Great. The only other thing I'll say is that I see this every year in the budget since I've been on council for facilities maintenance. We have 2 people and whatever the standards, right? They say we're supposed to have 22. We have extra money, right? And we're expecting in fund balance. Why not add another inspector in that area if we're so far behind in numbers? So thank you.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I am going to add a comment. It's more so for the community's sake, but Alderman Crable's comments about public safety pensions. One thing that I'd like to remind the community, and I think I say this about this time every single year, the employees receive a defined benefit pension, and we're governed by the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, which is the majority of the city employees, and then also statutorily the police and fire pension funds. But the one thing of note, statutorily, both the police and fire pension funds were created in the early mid-70s. There was no requirement to fund those at anywhere close to 100%. So they're woefully behind. And this statutory requirement to fund at 90%, and then previous council took action to fund at 100%, is something that we're unlike a lot of communities. And we're about 65% funded, and comparatively, that's very good for other communities as well. But past councils, recent past councils, and statutory changes over the last 10 or 15 years, over the course of nearly 50 years of having public safety pensions, there was no requirement to fund those. So we are playing catch up. And I know this council knows this, but that's just a reminder for the community when we start talking about pensions. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I think we have Councilmember Bolin and then Councilmember Walsh afterwards.
Thank you for all the preparation and work, the whole department, they did great. What I want to thank you for mostly is your conservative projections. I think that was going forward, it's a good idea. And since we're talking about pensions, I think that they're fairly well funded compared to other communities. So I think we should be proud of that as a community. I do have a question with the property tax. Is that's 1.4 million a one time only, or is that going to be going forward every year?
You're talking about the addition.
Yeah,
So council gets to approve each and every levy, but it is my intent to submit that going forward
okay.
to help
So
fill that hole. Yes.
okay, so if the EAV goes up, then, and we decide to capture that every year, we'll make the decision where that goes, or?
Yes, I mean, every year that there's an EAV increase, we will submit the thoughts to council for authorization. In years past, it just kind of went into the general corporate line. So it's basically just general revenues for the general fund. But this year, the EAV increase was solely dedicated
Okay.
to the pensions, a 50-50 split between police and fire.
Okay.
So we'll kind of make that assessment. The pension contribution will go up every year. We're we're committed to making up the difference, but whether or not, the EAV is where we're going to associate that, we'll
Okay,
make that assessment and present it to council.
okay. That's good to know. Let's see what else. With the local motor fuel tax, I'm glad to see it is going up to 10%. But with inflation and the prediction that was made for need back in 2015 of 8 million per year, I'm gonna, for the next 4 years, I'm gonna keep pushing for more funding for infrastructure. I know that we have a problem, or the communities in general have a problem getting enough contractors to do the work, but more funding the better, because you're bringing forward like the 20-year plan or whatever. It's sewer, streets, water, all sorts of stuff. So whether it's just streets or not, I just want to make sure that the infrastructure is the focus. And I'm talking about clean water and streets and sidewalks. And then I'm very thankful that you brought forward the debt. I had specifically asked for that. I think it's important to keep, in the forefront. And it looks like the roll off is about 11 million over the next 2 years. I'm putting this out for the public. That's a lot of money to be rolling off, which means we don't have to pay for that. And then I have a question. Well, the future will be annually about 6 million. So that is on pace with what we've done in the past, maybe 5 million or so a year with debt service. But we will have future debt considering facilities that we're going to have to address, like the police, the garage, fire station, that kind of stuff. So that's mainly for the community, not for you. So, but anyway, I appreciate all the information. Thanks.
Thank you. Last but not least, Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you.
This
very
is a
much.
hint for everybody. Just kidding.
Thank you, Scott. This is absolutely fantastic. And I really do appreciate, the work that goes into this is just nuts. If we could put page 11 up, please, it's on the bonds. Perfect, thank you. And a couple things I wanted to point out here. A lot of this money, a lot of these bonds and all that, because of your guidance and the activities that you have done, is that a lot of this, most of this has been borrowed at very low rates. And that's because of your guidance and your wisdom. And as we move forward and knowing where rates are today and knowing at the capital projects that are out there on paper and all the things that are desired, we're not going to borrow at those low rates anymore. Those days are currently gone. Maybe we'll get back there someday in the future, we can all hope. But those days are gone. And so right here, looking at this, am I right here looking at that bottom right-hand corner, we have $68 million in debt. And that's obviously going to roll off here over the next, few years here. Just look right there, right off the bat. Next year, it looks like 1.4 million rolling off here in fiscal year 2024. And then and then the next year after that, looks like we're going to roll off another 1.2. And so as Donna pointed out, these numbers are going to start dropping here. And so the question that will be placed upon this council moving forward is looking at it and going, oh, look, we have we have extra money. What are we going to do with that money? And with the reminder that, the bonds were put together for a certain purpose and, taxes were raised and revenue was brought in for a certain purpose. And some taxpayers, a lot of taxpayers have memories. These are that, hey, we borrowed this money for this and now we just want to keep that. The city just wants to keep this money. And sometimes they want their money back. because it's their money. It's not our money to turn around and spend. So thank you on that. The next thing I want to look, I don't need the slide for this, but on the police and fire calls, you had 209 police calls per day, and I believe that said 36 fire calls per day. So for the fire department, that accounts to, breaking it down even further, 1.5 an hour, which is really quite amazing for fire and rescue, and then 8 calls per hour for our police department. And so that's what the chief's team is doing, is 8 calls per hour, which is just absolutely fantastic. Looking at those numbers, so talking about that for the public, our police department, our fire department are very, very busy in keeping us safe. And that's just absolutely outstanding. The last thing, we have 812 lane miles of roads. And we do what percentage of that a year? About 1.5%, 2% tops.
I'm gonna have to defer to Public Works, and they're gonna highlight and run through that in a month, the
Okay.
percentages and what the extra 3 million is gonna be
Oh.
able to accomplish.
But it's low. I mean, we're not, we spend a lot of money, but we're not, there's no possible way to keep up with what we're doing. And there's, and catch up. I mean, we talk about the great work we're doing and catch up for the pensions, but then we don't catch up on the roads. And some of those roads lead to increased number of calls for those police and fire. As somebody hits a large bump or a large crack in a road, you may have a rescue call going out. You may have police department having to go out because there's a car that's damaged in the road. And so that is a call that our fire department and our police department are having to go out. And so, there is that cause and effect on the roads. We talked about the motor fuel tax. And I've kind of touched on this before. We're a government body. We like to kick the can down the road. Motor fuel tax, as we keep increasing the EVs, our motor fuel tax is going to start decreasing. And as we push towards more and more EVs. And right now, and here's a reality on the EVs, they are not inexpensive vehicles. So right now, as we increase our EVs, the people with means who can afford the EVs are not paying the motor fuel tax to upkeep the roads. Those without the means who have to drive internal combustion engines are paying that motor fuel tax. And so while and I actually had somebody in the last week turn around and say, well, if we have increased EVs, let's increase the motor fuel tax. Well, that would be more on those less fortunate, and the people who just can't afford to go out and buy a $70, $80, $90, $120,000 vehicle. And so let's keep that in mind, that we've got to do something with EVs. And I know we've talked about, waiting on the state. That could be a really long time waiting on the state of Illinois to actually make a decision on something like that, because the state doesn't like to make the hard decisions. So, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. The time is at 0 now. So I want to thank you, Scott, and for a great presentation as usual. And also want to remind everyone, I think you mentioned that before, but about the budget books. Those are documents that I find to be extremely accessible intellectually, because they're, in my opinion, they're not overly complicated. It's written in plain language and it's accessible to everyone. And I've always found them to be very interesting to read, because I learn more about what the city does. If you want to learn what the city does and what the priorities are, go look at the budget books and you'll understand how the city works. So thank you very much for your work. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a 8A. Oh, yes, 8B, item 8B, consideration and action on an ordinance approving violence prevention measures and amending the budget ordinance for the fiscal year ending April 30th, 2023 to increase the general fund budget by $500,000 as requested by the Finance Department. And I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Gleason for some introductory remarks.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. No presentation this evening. There's no change in what's being proposed after the 2 or 3 presentations and the correspondence back and forth with council. But I do want to remind the community of this. Several communities received direct funding as part of the state of Illinois, the current budget. We received $500,000. We were assigned. This came out of the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. We were assigned a grants administrator coordinator, which is always what happens. And our grants coordinator suggested that we use the $500,000 received as a grant for already expended funds on different items in order for us to meet the closeout requirements that were at the end of this current fiscal year for the state. So what that does is basically frees up $500,000 to put towards other programs, which is what has been presented. So tonight, the item is a budget amendment to free up that $500,000 to apply that to the already presented items. So, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. And I'm gonna turn over to council. We have questions. So Councilmember Ward.
Yes, I'd like to move approval with several amendments.
Okay, and could you maybe explain the amendments real quick?
Do we need a second first? I don't know, but I'm happy to.
Yeah, I would probably,
Did you actually move?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Okay.
Second.
okay, all right, sounds good. I didn't know if
So-
people would needed an explanation before they could second.
Right, right. I circulated the text of these amendments to the council and to some city staff and to the mayor ahead of time, but I'll summarize them. I circulated them so that people would have a chance to take a look at it. And because there are several of them, but primarily there are 2 categories of amendments that I'm proposing. One category is primarily correcting and clarifying some language. I think there were probably some typos in there. And that really is the vast majority of them. There is also one more substantive amendment that I'm proposing. So let's start with the clarifications. On the 3rd whereas clause, it, as presented, it reads, whereas receipt of funds from the DCEO grant will free up additional monies that the city can utilize to implement additional violence reduction measures programs. It seems like there's an extra word there, either measures or programs seems to be extra. So that's one thing that I'm proposing, that we eliminate the word measures and simply leave programs there. And then throughout the document where it refers to measures, simply replace that with programs. So that's one set of amendments. In the 4th whereas clause, it also refers to violence prevention. In the 3rd, it refers to violence reduction. So at various points in this document, we're talking about violence reduction, and at other points, we're talking about prevention. Those seem to be different concepts, but they both seem to be concepts that have merit and are valuable. I can't imagine anybody on this council who would disagree with the idea of reducing violence or preventing violence. I think they're both good things. So why not have both of them in this document? So the second amendment has to do with adding prevention or adding reduction at various places so that we're talking about both. So that's the set of clarifying amendments that I'm proposing. The substantive amendment is to create a new section following section 2. Section 2 reads, the city council hereby approves the violence prevention measures set forth in Exhibit A and authorizes city staff to pursue said measures. With the clarifications that I'm offering, I'm suggesting a new section 3, and it would read, the city council directs city staff prior to the next budget cycle to develop specific measurable targets for violence reduction and prevention in our community. And prior to the next budget cycle, assess and report on each of said programs' impact on said targets. So we've had mentioned earlier in this very meeting, we've had mentioned the idea of fiscal stewardship, being good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. We've frequently spoken in this room about fiscal responsibility, fiscal accountability. And I think those are good things. I think those are excellent things. And I think that our community, our taxpayers deserve to know how well the programs that we are spending their hard-earned money on, how well they're working. And I would like to see us, before the next budget cycle, actually have some data to review these programs and say, yay, they are working. And this is how we've measured how they're working. So that's what section 3 would do. And of course, the rest of the document would be renumbered. So that's the substance of what I'm proposing. I would welcome any questions. Sorry, I can't take questions from the public right now. I'd love to.
Well,
We need to extend the time, Mayor.
oh, is that 0 from right now?
Thought so.
Okay, all right. Well, can we have a motion to extend then?
Yeah, extend by 10 minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes.
I'll second.
Okay, all right. Quick voice roll call.
Councilmember Welch.
Yes.
Councilmember Emig,
Yes.
Councilmember Becker,
Yes.
Councilmember Bolin,
Yes.
Councilmember Urban,
Yes.
Councilmember Ward,
Aye.
Councilmember Craybill.
Yes.
Councilmember Crumpler.
Yes.
Okay, it is extended. And now we'll go with Councilmember Walsh and then Councilmember Crumpler.
All right, great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I love these additions. Nice catch on the wording, by the way. And I really like the idea of, some type of measure to see how are the things working that we're doing. It makes sense. Great idea. Fabulous idea. And throwing it in there. My only question comes to approval of this. And that is, do we need to approve the amendment and then the ordinance, or can we approve it all in one fell swoop?
I believe the motion was to approve as amended. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And was that the intent of the second? Yes. So this is just, the vote on this, when you get to a vote, will be to approve as amended.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And it approves both at the same time, right? Okay. So we'll go with Councilmember Crumpler and then Councilmember Emig.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just reiterating what Councilmember Walsh said. Since all of these features of this proposal are new, I think we do need to know how effective they are. And I commend Chief Symington and his staff for putting together these 8 programs. I think, they all have a wonderful potential. But I think requiring data collection for each of the proposed programs can and should be brought back to council. That does make us fiscally responsible. It allows us to highlight what's working and hopefully what's not working, but so that we can continue programs that are working well and maybe eliminate ones that don't seem to be helping the community. Thank you.
Councilmember Emig.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to remind everyone that in this initial conversation, I suggested reaching out to Dr. Frank Beck at the Stevenson Center, just because this is the kind of research that can inform the creation of metrics. And I also want to note to the police department that I don't want to assume that these metrics don't exist. I'm sure that there are already many things happening to assess, but it just makes it more intentional, and that it's an opportunity for us to collaborate with other agencies going forward. So I will be voting for this amendment.
Okay, Councilmember Becker and then Bolin.
Just real quick, I agree with what Councilmember Ward said. Second, what everybody else is saying. One caution is in developing metrics like this on these type of programs, it may be very hard to tie a result to one of the individual programs. It may be a combined input. So just making everyone aware that you may see, and I expect you will see positive impact, but it might be hard to tie each of the impacts to an individual program. We should try, but it may be hard.
Okay, Councilmember Bolin.
Well, it's my understanding that these programs are for just 1 year. Is that correct? Okay.
Ish.
So I'm trying to process this. I don't understand how bringing it into the next budget cycle, collecting data and all this, and however it's written here, if it's just a 1 year program, yeah, I have trouble with the amendment. I have trouble with the fact that it wasn't brought forward for discussion or approval, possibly with Mr. Jurgens before it was sent out to council. And I just wonder if anyone knows what the official name of the DCEO grant is. Prevention probably should be the word that stays in, because that means stopping from happening rather than reduction. Because reduction will happen if there's prevention. So adding words, changing words, I understand that when it's not consistent, you can change the one that's not consistent based on the intent of the ordinance. And I'll give an example. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And you could look at reduction as cure. That's all I have to say. I'm not in favor of word mincing and changing ordinances when, they've been approved and written by Mr. Jurgens. My experience with him since 2014 has been very positive, and I've never had any problem with the ordinances that he's written. Thank you.
Councilmember Crable and then Councilmember Walsh. And then maybe after that, we call it a day.
Oh, we got somebody else.
No. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. Okay, Councilmember Urban. Because I'm quiet.
So, okay, so I'll go ahead and just say, I think, yeah, this was, I think more was done in sharing this with the council in advance and actually marking what the changes were so they could easily be seen. And I think if there was something wrong with, with how it was presented legally, that Jeff would have said something. So, yeah, I don't have any issue with that. I'm supportive of the amendments, and I do think some of them go for longer than 1 year. I think there's something that's like 12,000 over 5 years. something like that. I think it's maybe text for tips. So some of these things are, and then once you buy the drones, they're going to be, around, right? And so, yeah, I think part of this is going to be more. And I think the other thing is you have that, you have that evaluation, you use the metrics, and you help determine, is this something do we want to have another gun buyback program again, because it worked so well, or it didn't work so well? That I know it's worked well in some cities and others it hasn't. So we can judge that as to whether it's something we want to continue to pay for. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think we had Councilmember Walsh and Councilmember Urban.
I'm going to be real quick here. Councilmember Crable nailed my points. Thank you.
Okay,
No.
thank you. Councilmember Urban.
Thank you, Mayor. City Manager, could you address a question? In this particular issue, were we not moving, or this motion was to allow for the budgeting from our current budget, and then this grant would be coming in from next year? Is that correct? Or can you just clear my brain here for a moment?
When we received this request, I don't know, 3:30 this afternoon, we just tried to cover the bases, make sure that we were putting council on firm ground to be able to act on this, table it, take it as it's was currently presented. And I'm gonna maybe ask a couple of clarifying questions and trying to answer your question. Is one, this would be at the end of the FY24 budget cycle, just for clarification, to make sure that we're not talking about next month, the end of this budget cycle. And then for some of the programs that are reoccurring, we do, the fire department and the police department, they provide annual reports. So a lot of times new initiatives, and this would fall into that category. This is something that would definitely be commented to about this time next year regarding this. This is not so much about the DCO grant. If we choose to deviate from what the DCO grant language was, which was found in a line item in the state budget, we can do that. Because what we're talking about tonight is amending the budget so that we can free up $500,000 for the programs that have been presented to council. So maybe that was a long answer that did not answer, but hopefully it did.
Close. If I were, I don't know how to ask my question politely. If I agree and I say yes and I vote along this, is the wording that I am agreeing to with this amendment that they've put at us at the last minute, is there a jeopardy of us not getting the grant?
No, and I'm sorry. That honestly, that ship has sailed. So I mean, the DCO grant has already been submitted because our grant coordinator highly recommended because this was something that happened at the state level. We're very appreciative of what happened at the state level, but there was a quick and short turnaround. I mean, there was a long period of time before we had definitive rules on how the grant was going to work. So our grant coordinator reached out to us, Assistant Chief Kenny Bays and the Chief Symington, and said, I would find already expended items to apply this grant towards. You can do that. I would recommend you do that because the funds have to be expended, not obligated, but expended by the end of the state's current fiscal year. So that's exactly what we did. So the DCO grant obligation has already been met. We now find ourselves, since we submitted in the DCO grant, $500,000 of items that we already spent money on. We now are freeing up $500,000 to apply towards the presented items that the police department presented a couple of times. So does that answer your question?
Close enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
May I offer one clarification? When I refer in the amendments to the next budget cycle, I am indeed referring to the fiscal year 24. So basically a year from now, I'd like to hear how these things are working.
Okay, thank you. All right. Yep, seeing no other questions, concerns, then we can go ahead and vote on the
Can I say something?
the item as amended. Seeing a couple of people. I'm playing the theme song of Jeopardy in my head. Huh? Yeah. Let's just do a voice vote for you then.
Yes.
Okay, all right, sounds good. So there is one nay to announce, Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Bolin,
Um, Okay, the next item on the agenda is city manager's discussion.
And I think I just have one slide tonight, Mayor, and I have two. March on indoor farmers market. I believe March is the last month for this to be indoors, and then we move it back to the downtown. But it's March 18th, 9 a.m. to 12. So that will be this coming. And then April 1st Friday is Easter season, so it's Hunt for the Golden Eggs. April 7th, which is I guess the Friday before Easter Sunday on April 9th, and that's 5 to 8 p.m. And I have no additional comments, Mayor. Thank
Okay,
you.
awesome. And the mayor's discussion, I just wanted to mention that this past Saturday, the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Secretary was in town for an event. And she had great things to say about the city of Bloomington, so which was wonderful to hear. Other things I've been doing for the past couple of weeks, most notable was spending some time with a Cub Scout troop talking about the city, which was very interesting. Lots of very interesting questions. Same thing for Stevenson Elementary, third grade class, and also at Irving, doing a reading for some kids. So that was very interesting as well. I'm not sure they were very impressed with my reading, but it was, fun nevertheless. And on March 27th, I will not be here. I will be on a trip abroad. So you will have the honor of having Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Bolin, leading the council meeting. And I know she won't be as goofy as I am. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to council members for anyone who has comments. Okay, we have three. So let's start just in this order, right?
Thank you, Mayor. I had the privilege at the end of February to attend, be a part of the One Voice team that went to Washington, DC, representing McLean County, up the town of Normal and Bloomington. And one of the things that we did, we got to meet with legislatures and senators. And in our meeting with Representative Sorensen, one of the things I asked was, would he be interested in coming to council or a meeting of the whole and chatting with us about his priorities for this community. He is relatively new. Many of you know that Councilmember Sorensen actually grew up in the Rockford area. And so I asked him and he said he was very interested in that. So my question tonight to this council is, would you be interested in having Representative Sorensen come and perhaps speak with us about the priorities of his community, his priorities for this community at a future meeting of the Committee of the Whole? I'm seeing nods. Well, thank you very much. I think the invitation should obviously come from the mayor. And I look forward to having him come speak with us. Thank you.
Awesome. Councilmember Ward.
Yes, thank you. I want to draw attention to a very troubling WGLT piece that was aired a few days ago regarding conditions at Phoenix Towers. And I shared a link to that story with my fellow council members, along with a question. Um, in, in part, I'll read just a very brief part of that story. So I quote, "In the case of other housing, if a landlord or property management company within Bloomington were to be repeatedly found in violation of city ordinances regarding health and safety, the consequences could involve going to administrative court, an arm of city government that deals with ordinance violations. Phoenix Towers and its owner has never been taken to administrative court or formally cited for ordinance violations, according to city spokesperson Catherine Murphy. Quote, I've asked the legal department and they say from a municipal prosecution standpoint, we don't cite HUD properties and they are not aware of the city ever citing a state housing authority owned property either, Murphy said. That quote doesn't mean it hasn't happened. It's just not known to our current staff. So the question that I raised was, I understand that we don't address these issues at HUD and state housing authority properties, but is there a reason we can't? I would like to hear some response to that. I think that we owe it to all members of our community when issues are raised about their living conditions to help them. We have people who are crying out for help. And I think as a city, we have an obligation, whether they're city properties or not. I hear frequently that, we should not just be paying attention to things in our own wards. We should be thinking citywide. This isn't in my ward, so I am speaking on behalf of people outside my ward. But we as a city have an obligation to care for the least of these.
Sure.
I can respond to that, and actually, thank you for the opportunity, Alderwoman Ward. I wasn't a part of the interview. And sometimes, unfortunately, there's only so much space in a radio interview or a print interview, and it may have been taken out of context. I don't know, don't have a clue. But I do know this, that Phoenix Towers, every time that we receive a complaint, our inspectors respond to it. And they address the issues. At times it's found unfounded. At times there are corrective measures that are expected to be taken. And the fact that they have not shown up in administrative court is because the problems have in fact been addressed. This is not a HUD-owned property. This is a privately owned piece of property that provides this within our community. And there is a HUD component for some of the financing for the residents that are elderly, and some have varying degrees of disabilities. It's an open apartment complex where people can come and go as they please. But Melissa Hahn, the Economic Community Development Director, she's got a link where any anonymous complaint, you don't even need to give your name. Any anonymous complaint will be followed up upon, and that's exactly what the city staff do. So I appreciate the opportunity to hopefully set the record straight.
Thank you. Councilmember Bolin.
Yeah, since we were talking about in the finance report about everything that the city does, on my way to downtown, I take West Oakland to Gridley to Front and then Park. The number of sidewalks that have been fixed is unbelievable, and they're still working on them. So I want to give kudos to the Public Works Department.
Thank you.
I just had a
Councilmember
follow-up
Carville.
question on Phoenix Towers. So I mean, yeah, I understand from the story that the number of complaints have increased in the last few years, and if it's something where it's keep getting fixed, but there keeps being legitimate complaints, is that something that, that there's a ongoing problem, right? Is that something that could something more could be done with that would maybe cause it to go to administrative court.
Would you mind, Alderman Crable, asking that last part of the question again?
I'll try. Yes, so it's, you could have a couple of complaints that those are resolved, but then let's say you have 50 similar complaints, they all get resolved, but they keep happening, right? To me, that's different. And I wonder if that's something that changes things at all.
And that's what I thought you asked, and the answer is no, it doesn't. At the time that, we either do a rental inspection, because that's something that we do proactively and by code at that property and others. And then whenever there is a complaint, it's a tough answer to provide, because we know that they are legitimate concerns. Absent being able to take that building from the bottom floor to the top floor, moving residents to a different location while extermination measures like our staff would really like to see. And I'm going to say the property owners probably would also like to see that. I don't know that you can completely address the reoccurring problems that do get addressed that keep the property owners from administrative court. It's tough. It's predominantly an elderly population, a disabled population, and it's one that is a high priority for staff, even though it may not appear to be that way. Even the property owners, they're providing reports on extermination records that they don't need to, just so that they can make us aware of the steps that they are taking. So I actually appreciate the opportunity to comment to that. I probably should have done it under my city manager update or my city manager comments. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Urban. And then we're going to call it a day.
Thank you, Mayor. Since we're discussing Phoenix Towers, it is in Ward 6. And what I would like to make people quite aware of is every person at Phoenix Towers that reaches out to me, I get back in touch with them. I try to locate exactly what apartment they're in. And I am typically the one who is filing complaint after complaint after complaint to city staff. And those complaints are being followed up on. We are doing everything that we possibly can as city council people, as a staff for the city. Again, this is private property owned, right? We have a limitation to what we can and cannot do as a city council, as a staff person that works at the city. There are limitations. I have a bleeding heart for these people, because I would love to see this completely, the issues that are there completely eradicated. But that isn't something that I can wish into reality. But what I can do is respond to each one of those people with a personal response and file those complaints. If you look at other residential apartments and complexes that we have within the city, there are not nearly as many complaints as coming out of Phoenix Towers. And if you FOIA all the complaints for Phoenix Towers, the clerk's office would be quite disturbed, because it's a lot. And the reason it's a lot is because people like me and other people in the surrounding area are filing those complaints. And those residents are absolutely capable of filing complaints as well. So they might get 5 or 6 complaints from one single resident or one single apartment. But I have confidence in everything that I've been doing and working with the staff, that we are doing everything we can within the realm of what the law allows the city to do or not to do. Now, going out on social media and creating chaos is not something that I'm going to participate in. Okay? That's where I'll leave that. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that said, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to
I'll
adjourn.
second
I'll
that
second.
motion.
Okay, the second, triple and quadruple. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you very much. And we will see